Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about the Pied Piper of Pasadena, Part 9. This is the story of Dean Corll. If you remember from our past videos, we had talked about how in September of 1970, David Brooks would walk into Dean Corll's apartment and witness him raping two boys on his torture board. And Dean Corll had given David Brooks the deal that if he promised to keep quiet, he would buy him a brand new car. And after the fact, he had promised to pay David Brooks $200 per child that he would lure to Dean Corll. And when we last left off, David Brooks had began assisting Dean Corll with abducting and luring in these children. And one of the last crimes that we discussed, the Waldrop brothers, after assisting with those murders, Dean Corll would go out and buy David Brooks a brand new 1971 Corvette. And from this moment, David Brooks would begin driving around, and he would often go into a convenience store / gas station, to where he would shortly befriend a clerk who worked there, Randall Harvey. And upon their friendship there, they would get into a disagreement over some stolen stereo parts. And this would get into a very heated argument, and Randall Harvey would actually tell his mother about this disagreement. And one thing to be noted about this is one particular day, David Brooks, before leaving, would actually threaten to kill Randall Harvey. And this was not an idle threat. On March the 9th, 1971, Randall Harvey would go to work like he normally would and finish out his shift. And after he had finished out his shift, he would get on his bicycle and would ride his bike home to where his family lived in Oak Forest. Around the halfway mark, before he would even get home, he would run into not only David Brooks, but Dean Corll in the windowless white van. But this would be the more different abduction and luring than any of the other kids that had been tortured and killed. Instead of luring him in with enticing him of ideas of alcohol or smoking weed, Dean Corll and David Brooks would pull up to him, get out of the van, and they would grab Randall Harvey and drag him over into the windowless white van and throw him inside. Then they would take the bicycle and put it in the back of the van. While Randall Harvey was inside the van, David Brooks and Dean Corll would then take nylon cord and bind and gag him and throw him in the back seat, and there they would continue driving to Dean Corll's apartment on Magnum Road. On the way to Dean's apartment, they would also discard Randall's bicycle, never to be found again. Once they had gotten to the apartment on Magnum Road, Dean and David Brooks would carry Randall Harvey into the apartment. Once he was inside the apartment, Dean would go about what he normally does with any of his victims. He would tie him to the torture board that was suspended from the ceiling. There, Dean Corll would not only torture, but forcibly sodomize Randall Harvey. But instead of taking a nylon cord to kill Randall Harvey like he had done with the previous victims, he would take out a small .22 pistol and shoot him once in the head. This would also be one of the first victims that Dean Corll had where he would not pay David Brooks. But David Brooks was not really concerned about payment with Randall Harvey, and because of his fight with Randall Harvey, he considered that Dean killing Randall Harvey was payment enough. A few days would go by and Randall Harvey's mother would actually go to the police and report him missing. And she would not leave out the argument and fight that her son had had with David Brooks over the stolen stereo equipment. But instead of going and talking to David Brooks about that particular fight, the police would speculate that David Brooks had no affiliation or connection to the missing whereabouts of Randall Harvey, and that Randall Harvey was probably a runaway. Now, when Randall Harvey's body was unearthed in 1973, his body and his case would still go unsolved for the next 37 years. Because prior to his murder from Dean Coral, his family would be subject to a house fire where most of his medical records and dental records would go up in flames. So there was no way to tell who he was. And he would be one of the many unidentified bodies that they would find, and not only in the boat shed, but the various other places that they had unearthed bodies when it came to Dean Coral. The police, after unearthing all the bodies, would eventually go to the mother of Randall Harvey to ask to have any further investigations done. But Randall Harvey's mother would decline any kind of investigation and would even tell the police that she had accepted the fact that her son was dead. In 2008, Randall Harvey's sisters would actually approach the police and donate strands of hair to do DNA testing to find out if one of the bodies was in fact Randall Harvey. And sure enough, one of those hairs would match on the bodies that was uncovered. They would then take the body and give it to the sisters, to which they would take the body and have it cremated. And they would take the ashes of that body and spread it over the same lake they had spread their mother's ashes, where she had passed away in 1994. One of the sisters would make a comment and say, "He deserves to be fishing with Mama. He's lived a hard enough life." When it came to Dean Coral, David Brooks would make a statement referring to the killings, and I quote, "First there was oral sex, then there was rectal sex. Aside from the screaming and crying, once they would go on the board, they was good as dead. It's probably a horrible way to put it, and it probably sounds terrible, but they weren't no great loss." End quote. Just to kind of give you an idea of David Brooks' thoughts on the victims that he helped kill. On May the 9th, 1971 at 2 p.m., David Hilligeist would leave his family's home and begin walking down to the local pool. And his other brothers and sisters would actually be over there and swimming. But David Hilligeist, who is 13, would be a little insecure about swimming with his family, so he would actually make a detour and begin walking over to a neighbor's house who was also a friend of David Hilligeist. Now, Winkle and Hilligeist were fairly young and very slim build, which would make them an ideal target for Dean Coral. Both boys, however, would not even make it to the pool, and in fact, witnesses had even claimed seeing not only Gregory Winkle, but David Hilligeist climbing into the back of a white windowless van, which we both know was Dean Coral's. It can be said it probably did not take much for both boys to climb in the van with Dean, mainly because of his reputation as the Candyman. And Gregory was one of the many kids that used to go into the back of the factory's break room and play pool with Dean Coral and several other teenage boys. And Dean Coral would do to the boys that he had done with all the others. He would talk about how he had some weed to smoke, or he would provide alcohol for them to drink, and they would accompany him to his apartment, to where Dean Coral would get them intoxicated. And there, Dean Coral would do as he always did, strip both boys and shackle them to his torture board suspended from the ceiling. And this would probably be the most disturbing crime I've ever read about.